paid rent to parents, as they hid my $50,000 college fund and gave it to sister. I called Grandpa. Now they're out of the will, and I own the bakery. For context, I recently graduated from college, but my route was not simple. It all began when I was 18 and my parents pulled a stunt. Let me break it down for you. It was the summer following high school. I was excited to start community college in the fall. I chose a school near to home because, let's be honest, college is expensive, and commuting seemed like the sensible option. Plus, I had some savings from my part-time cafe work and was counting on my parents' help to get through this, so I believed I'd be fine. My parents sat me at the kitchen table one evening. I assumed it would be one of those normal, "we're so proud of you" conversations. But no. Instead, I received the, "you're an adult now" speech. You know the one. It's time to live on your own terms. You need to understand the value of money. Blah blah blah. Then my mother said, "We've decided not to pay for your college. You'll have to figure it out on your own." My stomach fell. It wasn't like I expected them to pay for everything, but not a single penny? No assistance with tuition, books, or even gas for commuting? It felt like a slap in the face. But wait, things get better. My father, who is usually the quiet one, said, "If you want to live here, you'll need to start paying rent and your own groceries. It's only fair." I just sat there thinking, what the hell? I mean, I was still in my childhood bedroom, sleeping under middle school posters, and now they wanted rent from me on top of everything else? To set the stage, my folks are not in financial difficulty. My mom is an accountant, and my father is a project manager. They are doing nicely. They weren't having me pay rent because they needed the money. They were doing so to teach me responsibility. Meanwhile, my younger sister Lux, who was 16 years old at the time, was living the life of a princess. Lux has always been the golden child, a straight-A student, captain of the cheer squad, and everyone's favorite. My folks almost worship her. I'd want to say I confronted my parents right then and there, but I didn't. I didn't want to create drama or appear ungrateful. I reasoned, all right, I'll pay the rent and work my way through college. I've always been independent. But deep inside, I was outraged. Rent was not the only thing I had to worry about. Tuition, books, gas, and groceries all mounted up. I started taking on extra shifts at the cafe, often working late into the night. In addition, I took on modest baking jobs, such as creating cupcakes and cookies for parties. It felt like I was always working, and no matter how much I earned, it was never enough. But I kept going because I wanted to be ready when school started. Moving out crossed my mind more times than I can remember. I've even started looking for apartments near campus, but the rent in my region is outrageous. Like, how can people afford this? Every place I looked at was out of my price range, even if I got roommates. I rapidly realized that moving out was not an option. Not yet, anyhow. So I struck a pact with myself. I would stay at home till I graduated. I'd keep my head down, save as much money as possible, and then cut them off totally once I had enough. That became my motivation. Every late-night shift, every dollar saved, every missed outing with friends, it was all part of my plan to leave and never look back. However, sticking around proved difficult. Mom and Dad didn't make things any better. They began asking for rent before I even started lessons. They would frequently remind me of my rent due date, even if I was only a day or two away from paying it. It wasn't like I was late or anything. They simply loved to put it over my head. Meanwhile, they were showering Lux with presents as if it was Christmas every week. They once took her shopping for a new cheerleading uniform and ended up buying her entire wardrobe. She returned home with bags full of clothes, shoes, and accessories, grinning from ear to ear. I asked Mom if they might at least help me with my textbooks for the semester, which was starting soon. She just looked at me and said, "Ellie, you need to learn to budget better. Lux doesn't have these kinds of expenses." That hurt. It wasn't just the money. It was how unconcerned they seemed about what I was going through. Lux did not make things any easier. She is not a nasty person, but she is clearly spoiled. She gloated about her new clothes or griped about how difficult cheer practice was, while I was surviving on 3 hours of sleep, juggling a job and saving for college. One night I got home fatigued from a double shift and found her sitting on the couch with her new AirPods. "Oh, Mom and Dad got these for me," she answered nonchalantly, as if it didn't matter. "You should get some too. They're amazing." I simply looked at her and replied, "Yeah, Maybe when I don't have to pay rent. She rolled her eyes and returned to scrolling through TikTok. There were times when I wanted to scream, telling my parents how unjust it was. But I knew it wouldn't make any difference. They had a golden child and I was just paying the rent. So I remained silent and concentrated on my escape strategy. College was meant to be an exciting new chapter in my life, but it seemed more like survival mode from the beginning. I expected to have enough time to find my feet, establish a rhythm, and perhaps even have some fun. But, nah. Between school, work, and my parents continually harping on me about rent, I was pretty much running on empty all the time. I was awake at 6 a.m. Every day, I'd get out the door at 7 a.m. and attend morning classes at my community college. I'd try to study between lectures, but by noon, I'd be hurrying to the cafe for my shift. Most days I'd work until 9 or 10 p.m., then head home and slump into bed. And on weekends? Forget about relaxing. That's when I'd start baking for little catering orders, because, surprise, working part-time wasn't enough. I'd want to claim I handled everything professionally, but that would be a lie. The cafe was usually somewhat chaotic. We were usually understaffed, and the pandemic had made folks especially antsy. So each shift felt like a marathon. I'd be behind the counter preparing lattes, then racing to the drive-thru, then dealing with Karen number 87, who thought her coffee wasn't hot enough, all while knowing I had a backlog of projects waiting for me at home. To make matters worse, my parents were of no help. They watched me dragging myself home late at night, but instead of offering support, they'd hit me with, "Don't forget your rent's due Friday," or, "We noticed the electricity bill went up, are you leaving your light on?" I wanted to scream every time. And of course, while I was struggling to make ends meet, Lux had no responsibilities. She has no employment, and all the leisure in the world to go to cheerleading practice, hang out with her friends, or spend hours scrolling TikTok. I'd come home to find her sitting on the couch with her favorite munchies, watching whatever new Netflix show she was infatuated with, while mom made her a smoothie to keep her energy levels up. It was like living in two separate universes under one home. The financial hardship was unbelievable. The rent wasn't terrible compared to what I'd pay if I moved out, but it still seemed like a smack in the face to be paying for the luxury of being in my own home. Add in additional expenses, and I was continuously broke. There were weeks when I'd open my bank app and just stare at the balance, wondering how I was going to stretch $42 to my next payday. And begging for assistance? Forget it. I once asked mom if she could pay groceries for a week because I had to buy a $200 textbook for class. She looked at me as if I had just asked her to mortgage the house and said, "Ellie, we're already doing so much for you by letting you stay here. Let me stay here," as if I weren't paying rent. As if I wasn't already contributing more than Lux, who continued to receive her stipend every month without being asked for a penny. Midterms were a particularly difficult period. I was drowning in assignments, not sleeping, and my hours at the cafe had been reduced because business was slow. I tried to compensate for the lost money with extra baking gigs, but there were only so many hours in a day. One weekend, I received a large order for a birthday party, 100 cupcakes and a personalized cake. It was excellent money, but it also required pulling an all-nighter to complete everything. I spent hours baking, icing, and decorating, and finished just in time to deliver the order and get to class. By the time I arrived home that afternoon, I was absolutely exhausted. I stepped into the kitchen to find Mom and Lux baking cookies for fun. Lux looked up and said, "Oh hey Ellie, you should join us. It's so relaxing." I wanted to throw the entire tray of cookies out the window. Instead, I murmured something about being weary and went into my room. I didn't wake up till the following morning. By the conclusion of the semester, I was absolutely exhausted. My grades weren't bad, but they weren't terrific. I was barely able to keep my head above water, and every time I considered how hard I was working just to get by, I felt a deep, boiling fury. It was unfair. I was doing everything I could to stand on my own 2 feet, as they desired, and they wouldn't acknowledge it. Meanwhile, Lux had everything delivered to her on a silver platter. I'm not sure how I made it through the first year. It felt like I was always sprinting uphill with a rucksack full of bricks. But I kept assuring myself that it wouldn't last forever. I just had to make it a little longer. What I didn't comprehend was that things weren't simply unjust. They were completely stacked against me. And when I eventually learned the truth, it hit me like a truck. By the time Lux reached her senior year of high school, It appeared like my parents were launching a full-fledged campaign to declare her the family's golden child of the century. Don't get me wrong, I knew they favored her, but this was next-level crap. My parents treated Lux's college plans as if they were a life-or-death mission. They took her on university visits months in advance, transforming them into small family holidays. Every time they returned, Lux had a new bounty of university merch: hoodies, water bottles, planners, as if she had already won the lottery. Meanwhile, I was simply trying to survive. My finances were so tight that I was always behind on something: tuition payments, books, car upkeep, you name it. I couldn't afford to take as many classes as I wanted, so my graduation date began to grow longer and longer. At this pace, I'd be fortunate to graduate before Lux. Mom walked into the kitchen one night as I was studying. I was already on edge since I had just learned I had forgotten to submit an online assignment. Again. She dropped it without even saying, "How's it going?" "We're thinking of getting Lux a car for college." I stared at her, attempting to process. "She's going to need something reliable," Mom replied, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. "You know how hard it is to get around without a car?" I nearly laughed. "You wouldn't even help me get a bus pass when I started college, and now you're buying Lux a car?" Mom gave me the "don't be dramatic" look. "Ellie, you've always been more independent. Lux needs more support to succeed." I did not say anything. I simply returned to my notes, pretending I wasn't seething inside. But here's the thing. It wasn't just the car. That was only the cherry on top. My parents had made it apparent that they were going all in on Lux's college education. Tuition, covered, rent, paid, monthly allowance? Of course. The same parents who told me I needed to learn the value of money were essentially giving Lux a blank check. It was like seeing someone live out a dream you never got to have. The favoritism did not end there. Mom began spending hours studying dorm decor with Lux, purchasing bedding sets and matching storage containers. Dad was suddenly a technology expert, assisting her in selecting the ideal laptop. They even went down to create a college prep budget, which resembled a shopping list for a spoiled teen. I'll never forget the night they gathered in the living room, hunched around the coffee table with campus brochures and spreadsheets. Lux was showing off a Pinterest board of dorm ideas, while Dad was jotting down notes like he was organizing a corporate merger. "What is going on?" I inquired, already knowing the response. "We're assisting Lux in choosing between schools," Mom added, without glancing up. "This is a huge decision. We want to ensure she is prepared." Prepared? Correct. When Lux began receiving acceptance letters, it was as if my parents had won the lottery. She was accepted into her top-pick school, and they threw her a celebratory dinner complete with her favorite cuisine and a cake that read, "Congrats Lux," in pink frosting. I didn't even acquire a good job after enrolling in community college. Throughout the evening, Mom kept saying how proud she was and how hard Lux had worked for this. She turned to me and said, "Ellie, you must be very proud of your sister. She's really going places." I wanted to shout, "Did you work hard?" Lux had no idea what hard effort was. She had been coasting through life on genius and family favoritism, whilst I was drowning in student loans and caffeine. After that, I began avoiding family dinners entirely. It was easier to concentrate on my own life than to see them raise Lux's pedestal higher and higher. The final straw arrived a few weeks before Lux's move-in date. I returned home from work one night to see a shiny used SUV parked in the driveway. At first, I assumed one of their friends had stopped by. But then Lux dashed outside, squealing. "They bought me a car!" she exclaimed, literally jumping up and down. I just stood there and stared at it. Later that night, I overheard Mom and Dad discussing Lux's monthly stipend. Apparently, they intended to give her enough to cover food, gas, and a little extra for fun. I couldn't afford anything else, so I ate ramen and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I considered saying something, calling them out for how unjust it all was. So what was the point? They'd simply say the same thing they always did. Lux needs more support. Or, it's not about favoritism. I kept my mouth shut. Lux, of course, was totally unaware. She'd come into my room every now and then to show me images of her dorm setup or express her excitement to begin her college trip. She once said, "Ellie, you're so lucky you learned to be independent so young. I'm not sure whether I could handle everything you do." Lucky. She believed I was lucky. I wanted to laugh in her face, But instead I simply answered, "Yeah, it's been great," and returned to my homework. The favoritism was no longer bearable. It was so obvious that I began to wonder if my parents considered me as their child, or simply a tenant who happened to share their DNA. I didn't tell anyone about how I was feeling for a long time. What was the point? My buddies were supportive, but they didn't fully understand. Bringing it up at home was like shouting into a blank. However, one night, I found myself contacting Grandpa Hank. Growing up, I spent hours in his bakery learning how to properly measure flour, crack eggs without spilling shells, and create the perfect frosting swirls on cupcakes. It was his way of telling me that hard work can be enjoyable as well. He never criticized me or put pressure on me to be perfect. He simply let me be myself. I hadn't spoken to Grandpa Hank in a long time. He and Grandma had been enjoying their best life since he retired a few years ago. The man worked his entire life to create his bakery business from the ground up, and when he chose to retire, he put it in the hands of one of his veteran managers, so he and Grandma could travel the world. They had always wanted to do it, and once he hung up his apron, they went for it. The disadvantage was that Grandpa wasn't particularly tech-savvy. He barely knew how to use his phone, let alone navigate social media, so staying in touch was difficult. He'd send the occasional postcard or phone call, but I mostly learned about their adventures via my parents. They'd barely been back for a short time when I called him that night. I suppose they choose to slow down and spend more time at home. I hadn't contacted him earlier because, frankly, I didn't want to unload my issues on him. He was retired, happy, and finally enjoying his life. The last thing I wanted to do was ruin it by dumping all my drama. But that night, I couldn't keep it in anymore. When he took up the phone, I felt my shoulders relax somewhat. "Hey, kiddo," he remarked, his voice warm and friendly. "What is going on?" I did not hold back. I told him everything. How I was drowning in expenses, how my parents were devoting all of their time and money to Lux's college plans while I was required to pay rent. I complained about the car they bought her, the allowance they planned to give her, and how I was trying to keep up in school. Grandpa listened patiently, allowing me to express myself fully. I could hear him make little acknowledgement noises every now and again, as if he was putting something together in his mind. Then he unexpectedly interrupted me. "Ellie," he began slowly. "Didn't your parents use the money I gave them toward your education?" I blinked. "What money?" There was a long gap, and when he spoke again, his tone shifted. It wasn't angry, yet, but there was a sharpness to it, as if he was striving to remain calm. "When you were 16, your grandma and I set aside $50,000 for your education fund. We handed money to your parents since they agreed to use it to pay for your tuition and expenditures. Are you telling me that they never mentioned anything to you?" I felt as if I had been hit in the gut. "They never said anything," I said with a trembling voice. "I've been paying for everything myself. All of it." Grandpa let out a long sigh that seemed to carry years of disappointment. "Ellie, the money was for you. We gave it to them to ensure that you got off to a good start and did not have to struggle. If I had realized what they were doing..." He drifted off, but I could hear fury creeping into his voice. It took me a minute to understand what he was saying. I'd been informed my entire life that my parents couldn't afford to support me, and preferred that I discover independence on my own. But now I'm learning that they had $50,000 set aside exclusively for me, and they hadn't even told me about it. "They lied to me," I explained. "Ellie," Grandpa said, "they lied to you. That money was yours, not theirs, not Lux's, yours." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to cry, but largely I felt numb. The previous few years of scraping by, working myself to the bone and falling behind in school, all felt a lot heavier. "What do you think they did with it?" I inquired, my tone barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Grandpa replied. And for the first time I could hear genuine rage in his voice. "But I'm going to find out." There was a long gap before he said, "Ellie, you're not alone in this. I will manage it. You just focus on school, okay?" Hearing him say that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. For years I carried everything on my own, believing that no one cared or noticed. But suddenly, for the first time, I felt like someone was on my side. "Thanks, Grandpa," I responded, attempting to maintain a calm voice. "Anytime, kiddo," he replied. And Ellie, don't let it crush you. You are stronger than they give you credit for. After we hung up, the numbness gave way to anger. How could my parents have done this to me? How could they hide something that was supposed to make my life easier from me, knowing how much I was struggling? It wasn't only about the money. It was the fact that they chose to let me suffer while elevating Lux. They had lied to Grandpa, taken from me, and then had the nerve to claim that I should be thankful for the scraps they provided me. That night, I was unable to sleep. My thoughts kept returning to all the times I'd begged for assistance, just a little, just enough to get by, and they'd dismissed me. Mom told me I needed to budget better while they were off getting Lux a new phone, or scheduling another campus visit. I reflected on all the sacrifices I'd made, working late hours, skipping meals, and delaying graduation because I didn't think there was any alternative. And the entire time, they had $50,000 in their pocket, which could have changed everything. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But I also felt something else. Hope. Grandpa was not the type of person who made hollow promises. If he claimed he would handle it, I believed him. For the first time in years, I felt less alone in this disaster. That concept didn't take away the pain, but it gave me something to hold on to. A few days after my initial conversation with Grandpa Hank, my phone displayed his name. I spoke with your parents, he began, without even saying hello. Ellie, you're not going to believe the excuses they gave me. I braced myself. What have they said? They told me they used the $50,000 your grandmother and I gave them for family expenses, he remarked, his tone stern. When I asked what that meant, they replied, your mother admitted they'd been saving it for Lux's college instead. I felt my stomach drop. $50,000. That was more than enough to cover my tuition, rent, and all of the other expenses I had been working so hard to pay off for years. They'd taken it all to ensure Lux had a stress-free college experience. They had no right, Grandpa insisted, practically enraged. The money was for you. I made it plain that they had to repay it, every dime, and if they don't, they're out of willpower. I can't stay here anymore, Grandpa, I replied abruptly. I can't look at them, knowing what they did. Then don't, he said promptly. There is a guest room here with your name on it. Pack your belongings and come over tonight. Moving out of my parents' house was the most straightforward decision I'd ever made. I didn't even bother to tell them I was going. As soon as I hung up with Grandpa, I started packing my luggage. Lux passed past my room at one point, lifting an eyebrow when she noticed the clutter. What is going on? She inquired, completely oblivious to everything that had occurred. I'm moving out, I said quickly, stuffing another bunch of items into a suitcase. She blinked. Wait. What? Why? Ask Mom and Dad, I murmured, shutting up my suitcase. I did not owe her an explanation. I didn't see my folks that night, they were both out. I put a brief note on the kitchen counter that simply read, I am going in with Grandpa. Don't call me. And suddenly, I was gone. When I arrived at Grandpa's house, he was waiting for me at the door. Come on in, kiddo, he called. This is where you belong, he said, pulling me into an embrace. The guest room was nice, with a large bed and a window overlooking Grandpa's garden. It immediately seemed more like home than my parents' house ever did. That night, for the first time in years, I went to bed without feeling as if the entire world was crushing me. However, the peace did not endure long. The next morning, the calls began. Mom was first. I didn't respond, but she left a voicemail that was so dramatic that I nearly laughed. Ellie, how could you have left like this? Do you have any notion how this affects our appearance? You are overreacting. Come home so we can speak it out. Yes, no thanks. Then Dad called. He was less dramatic, but as aggravating. Ellie, we understand you are upset, but this is not the way to handle things. We are family. We can work this out together. Sure, so they wanted to sort things out? Where was that energy when I was drowning in bills and pleading for assistance? By the end of the day, I had ignored a dozen calls and texts from each of them. The texts were a mixed bag of emotions. One minute they were apologizing, the next they were blaming me for turning Grandpa on them. Mom sent one SMS that stuck out. Ellie, you do not appreciate how difficult this has been for us. We were simply attempting to do what was best for everyone. Can't you see it? I stared at it for quite a while, before finally responding. No, Mom. You were not attempting to do what was best for everyone. You were trying your best for Lux, and you didn't care who got injured in the process. Her response arrived nearly immediately. That is not fair. We did not intend to hurt you. We believed you could handle it since you have always been so strong. There it was again. The same tired explanation. I didn't bother responding. The next day they began to visit Grandpa's house. I was sitting at the kitchen table helping him sift through some bakery paperwork when I noticed Mom's car arrived into the driveway. I groaned. They're here. Grandpa didn't seem surprised. Let me handle this, he said, straightening up and approaching the door. I remained in the kitchen but could hear everything. Mom was already in complete breakdown mode when Grandpa opened the door. Hank, we need to talk to Ellie, she remarked. She's being completely unreasonable about this whole situation. Grandpa did not let her in. Do you mean the situation in which you stole $50,000 from her? I think she's being really reasonable. Mom stuttered, attempting to defend herself. We did not steal it. It was for the family. You thought wrong, Grandma interjected. You were aware that the money was intended for Ellie. You made her struggle while pampering Lux. You don't get to come in here and play like a victim. I wanted to cheer. Mom tries again. But Hank, we were just trying to… Grandpa shut her off. If you are not here to apologize, please leave. Ellie deserves better than you, and I will not stand by while you try to guilt her into forgiving you. There was a long pause until I heard Mom's car door slam. She didn't even get into the house. When Grandpa requested that they repay the $50,000 they had stolen from me, Mom and Dad's entire plan fell through. They had been coasting along as if nothing was wrong, but Grandpa was not fooling around. He gave them a deadline, and when they realized he wasn't lying, panic must have set in. He made it clear that they needed to repay every penny, or they would forfeit their spot in the will. The consequences hit Lux almost immediately. Mom and Dad had done everything they could to help Lux adjust to college life. She was staying in a dorm like any other freshman, but they had gone above and beyond to make her feel at home. Lux had it all: a little fridge, a high-end coffee maker, matching decor, and even some expensive equipment to help her focus. She never had to consider finances or work. Her main responsibility was to enjoy her college experience. Well, not anymore. With $50,000 to repay, Mom and Dad had to tighten their pocketbook strings. Lux's weekly care package? Gone. The spending money they intended to send her? Cancelled. Even some of the upscale amenities in her dorm had to be returned. Suddenly, Lux wasn't simply another spoiled golden child. She was a college student like everyone else. What is the best part? She needed to obtain a part-time job. Naturally, I found out on Instagram. Lux posted a selfie in the mirror of a store with this caption: "First day of work, girl. Haha. New adventures." I couldn't help laughing. She made it sound like a fun little hobby, but I knew she was miserable. Lux quickly cracked. One night she called me sobbing so hard that I couldn't understand her. Despite my better judgment, I took up. "Ellie," she said, "everything is ruined." I took a deep breath. "What has been ruined, Lux?" "My life," she exclaimed. "Mom and Dad are not sending me any more money. They claim they cannot afford it. Now I have to work and budget." She began sobbing again. I rolled my eyes so hard, I thought they'd become trapped. "Lux, welcome to the real world. You're finally experiencing what the rest of us go through every day." She did not appreciate it. "This is all your fault," she said, her voice hoarse with rage. "If you hadn't told Grandpa, none of this would have happened." That made me laugh. "Oh, I apologize. Did I ruin your little bubble of privilege? Because in my opinion, you are only now catching up to what I have been dealing with for years." Lux started to say something else, but I was in no mood to dispute. "Look," I interrupted her, "if you want to blame someone, talk to Mom and Dad. They're the ones that stole from me to support your idyllic little life." She hung up on me after that, which really spared me the hassle. The weeks that followed were nearly entertaining. Lux began making cryptic social media comments about how difficult life was, and how she felt betrayed by those she trusted the most. It was hilarious. given that she had spent her entire childhood being pampered and insulated from reality. She acted as if the world had ended because she had to confront even a fraction of the difficulties I experienced. One image caught my attention. A photo of her dorm desk with a cup of instant noodles and a message that read, "College life. It's not as glamorous as it seems." I stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to respond. I wanted to say something like this: "You've been living like this for 2 weeks. Try it for years." But I stopped myself. What was the point? Lux would not understand. However, her pity party was not unnoticed. Her friends and fans bombarded her comments with offers of encouragement, writing things like, "Stay strong, Lux," or "You've got this," as if finding a part-time job and budgeting were insurmountable obstacles. According to family gossip, Lux was having difficulty adjusting to her new reality. She grumbled to anybody who would listen about how unjust things were. However, the sympathy was not as great as she had hoped. Most people were too preoccupied with their own issues to care about hers. Naturally, Mom and Dad attempted to lessen the blow. They gave her a few care packages, not as costly as before, but enough to remind Lux that she was their favorite. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. For years they told me that struggling was good for me, and would make me stronger. Now that Lux was struggling, they were doing everything they could to keep her from completely falling apart. But even with their assistance, Lux was not thriving. She was surviving, yes, but that was it. Her grades began to slide, she struggled to keep up with her job, and the flaws in her perfect facade began to show. And honestly, I did not feel sorry for her. Meanwhile, Grandpa provided me with more than just a place to stay. He ensured that I had everything I needed to get back on track. He assisted me in organizing my money, urged me to take a full course load in order to graduate from college sooner, and even got me involved in the operations of his bakery. It was fantastic to be with someone who genuinely cared about my future. My parents continued to try to contact me. Initially, it was constant. Mom left the phone after voicemail, her tone alternating between remorse and apology. "We're sorry, Ellie, okay? We made mistakes. But we are still your parents. We love you." Sure. They loved me, but not enough to treat me fairly when it mattered. Dad's messages were more restrained, but also frustrating. "Ellie, we understand you're upset, but you have to view it from our perspective. We were attempting to do what was best for our family. This family requires your assistance right now. Please come home." I did not respond to any of them. What was there to say? They were not regretful about what they had done. They were sad they had been caught. They merely wanted me back so they could exploit me once more. The calls eventually slowed down. I believe they knew I was not going to forgive them, simply because they asked me to. Grandpa sat me down in the kitchen just before I graduated. "Ellie," he continued, sliding a folder across the table. "I've been thinking about the future of the bakery." I opened the folder and discovered a stack of documents outlining the business's activities. Grandpa grinned at me, his eyes crinkling as they often do when he felt proud. "You've been quite helpful, and I can tell you genuinely care about this location. I want you to take control when you are ready." I looked at him, absolutely surprised. "Are you serious, Grandpa?" "Of course I'm serious," he replied. "You've earned it, Ellie, and I am confident you will make it much better." Hearing it from him was everything. For so long, I felt as if my efforts were in vain, that no one noticed how much I struggled. But Grandpa did. He always has. Following that, I focused on taking over the bakery. I put myself into learning everything I could about the firm, from personnel management to budgeting. Grandpa was right there behind me, guiding me through each step. By the time I graduated, I was ready to take the lead. Grandpa formally handed over the business, and we had a large celebration in the bakery. Friends, staff, and even some of my lecturers came to congratulate me. I hardly talk to my folks these days. They're still attempting to patch things up, as if a few apologies can suddenly make everything better. They aren't aware that Grandpa withdrew them from the will months ago. They're probably still hoping to weasel back in. But honestly, it isn't my concern. I am too busy running the bakery and creating something true for me. If they want to squander their time, that is their decision. Allow them to watch from the sidelines. I'm moving forward. And I am not looking back.